Well, when it comes to getting a college education in this country, it's becoming more expensive, something millions of Americans choose to do and pay for that choice in the form of loans and debt for decades after they graduate. And despite the job market now more unwelcoming for college grads than it's been for a long time, colleges and universities are still raising their prices. Over the last 30 years, tuition costs have risen by 600%. Also, average in-state tuition has risen by 8% just last year. And those who graduated in 2010 have an average of $25,250 in student debt. Now, in July, the threat of another blow to students. The interest rates on students' loans is scheduled to double from 3.4% to 6.8%. President Obama has brought this issue front and center, and now both Republicans and Democrats say they agree, and they vowed to prevent the interest rates from doubling. But it's not that simple. The two sides disagree on how to pay for it. Republicans want to offset costs by taking money from a program within President Obama's new health care law. Democrats they say oil companies and wealthy Americans should be taxed at a higher rate to help offset those costs. And today in the House, this afternoon, the Republican majority passed their version of the bill, which will most likely be vetoed by President Obama. Let's talk now about the student loan issue itself with Stef Gray, a student debt activist and co-founder of StudentDebt.com. Hey there, Stef. Excuse me. I've heard this battle described as politicians putting a Band-Aid on a tumor and then sending the patient home. What do you make of this issue, usually reserved for congressional committees as opposed to the public stage?
Well, it's bankers arguing about the rights of bankers. It's not really about students. It's not even about Obamacare, which Boehner is willing to gut in order to fix this temporary issue. You know, this isn't going to solve the student debt crisis at large. This doesn't address the lack of refinancing rights for students. And really what it comes down to is, once again, like every single issue we've heard in the past year, it's about a refusal to tax the hyper-rich. I don't understand why women's health has to be pitted against student debt reform. I mean, these are issues that affect some of America's most vulnerable, and there's no need for us to have to duke it out for assistance. And as a woman and student debtor, I'm very upset, and my health is not a bargaining chip.
They affect some of America's most vulnerable. Also, you know, the future of this country, people who stand to make a difference, you know, if given the opportunity. But when people are strapped with so much debt, so many loans that they never pay back, it's very hard to sort of take the next step, doing things like buying houses and starting businesses. You know, it's interesting, Steph, when you look at some of the most major riots and protests over the last year or so, many of them have been about this very issue, student debt. We have some video of massive protests in Chile, in London, and we saw this week, too. We're showing it on the screen here. This week in Canada, these people are angry at the rising cost of getting an education. Some of these protests even turn into riots. I'm wondering, I mean, do you think in this country we've just gotten so used to this continual upswing in costs, or what? Why aren't people doing what you're doing, you know, making more of a stink about this?
Well, I mean, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Things are bound to get worse. 53% of new grads from the class of 2012 are bound to be unemployed or underemployed. And if you're unemployed for only several months, you can default on your student loan, and that'll mess up your entire financial future. You may never be able to buy a house, rent an apartment, or even get a job with the 60% of employers that check credit when hiring. But what it comes down to, what I wanted to note, is that Sallie Mae, it all comes back to Sallie Mae, America's largest student lender. Think of them as how Bank of America was for the foreclosure crisis. Now, House Speaker John Boehner, his daughter works for Sallie Mae, and he's very close friends with their CEO, Albert Lord. So really, this is about nepotism as well. John Boehner's just helping out his friends and his child. He's not thinking about America's youth.
We certainly see a lot of that here in Washington, the revolving door between lobbyists and politics, and a lot of them are friends and relatives. We put some of the numbers up before, but if you look at this timeline of what's going on here, it's not just about this threat of the interest rate doubling. We've got about a quarter of, we've got about 25 years of state funding decreasing. That means, of course, that we've seen over the last few decades, then schools raise their tuition, and then in many cases the federal government steps in to fill those holes with more loan money. And as you said, when students graduate, they come out to a much rougher job market. Plus, they've got loans piled on them. Talk a little bit about this cycle, this vicious cycle that seems to be going nowhere fast.
Well, I mean, like I said, if you're unemployed and default and can't get a job because you've defaulted on a student loan, then you're trapped in a catch-22, which will affect your entire future and essentially hold whatever your version of the American dream is hostage, whether you'd like to get married and your partner does not want to take on all of your student debt, or other situations where you'd want to advance your career or have a child. And when you hold an entire generation's future hostage, and we've got a lot of free time from being unemployed and underemployed, then I think that Boehner's making a very bad mistake. I think he's also trying to exploit the opinion gap between youth and baby boomers on the issue of student debt reform, because frankly, baby boomers just don't get it. In 1980, tuition was 600% lower than it was today, and real wages have not risen very much in the past 30 years. So sure, maybe 30 years ago you would have been able to finance a full education while working full-time at Subway, but that's not the case. They need to hear the statistics. A lot of the media coverage of student debt focuses on emotional sob stories from the most extreme cases of student debt affecting Americans' lives, but it's a systemic issue that affects millions.
Yeah, a lot of people who
bring out the facts.
A lot of people who do have jobs and who have good jobs in, the career of their choice, but still struggle. I guess I'm wondering what your group, your website suggests the government do about these problems. Of course, it's easy to point our fingers and to list the things that are wrong, but do you think there are viable solutions out there?
Well, unlike Boehner, who serves only to help Sallie Mae, Representative Hanson Clark from Detroit, Michigan, who I had the pleasure of meeting in Washington a couple of months ago, is very much dedicated to this issue. He represents one of America's poorest congressional districts, so he has a unique understanding of the issue of student debt. And he also had loans through Sallie Mae directly and understands how they work as a company with regards to predatory lending and collection practices. Right now, Representative Hanson Clark wrote up a bill, H.R. 4170, which you can read more about at hr4170.com. And this is the student debt forgiveness bill. It would help with a lot of necessary changes in public policy and refinancing rights that would give student debtors a leg up on reclaiming their futures. For example, it brings back bankruptcy protection.
It's an interesting topic and certainly one that is going nowhere, as it stands to certainly be a campaign issue and one that more and more people are starting to take notice of, starting to care about. Just a shame that it has to be sort of made as a political issue, with each side sort of adding their own version of how it should be paid for. Stef Gray, organizer for Occupy Student Debt.
The last thing I wanted to mention is that, I love Obama. I'm going to be voting for him again this year, but I'm still not sure whether or not he takes this issue as seriously as he should be, because he's focusing only on federal student debt, not private student debt as well.
Interesting point. We are out of time, Steph.
When
Thanks.
he goes after the private lenders.
All right, thanks.
Have a great day.
Okay, you too.